The research vessel Celestial Seeker shuddered as it entered Earth's atmosphere, its stealth systems failing catastrophically. Inside the ship's main laboratory, Zara Venn braced herself against her workstation, her crystalline exoskeleton flickering with distress patterns. The supporting framework that usually helped her move despite her genetic condition sparked and whined as the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated. Engine core breach imminent, the ship's AI announced with infuriating calm. Emergency evacuation required. Zara's violet eyes darted to her research samples, the first comprehensive collection of Earth's upper atmospheric composition. Her life's work, about to be destroyed. But there was no time for regrets. Her weakened legs trembled as she pulled herself toward the escape pod section, using the specially installed support rails that accommodated her disability. The ship groaned, metal twisting as the hull began to fail. Zara's heart raced, both of them, beating in an erratic rhythm that matched the emergency lights pulsing. She was the last one aboard, the rest of the crew had already evacuated in an orderly fashion. But they hadn't needed to wrestle with malfunctioning mobility assistance technology. The escape pod's hatch opened with a hiss. Zara collapsed inside, her crystalline exoskeleton scraping against the metal walls. The pod was designed for emergency use, not comfort, and certainly not for someone with her unique needs. She activated the launch sequence with trembling fingers. Warning, trajectory calculations compromised, the pod's computer announced. Manual course correction required. Zara didn't have time for calculations. The Celestial Seeker was breaking apart around her. She punched the emergency launch control, and the pod shot away from the dying research vessel. Through the small viewport, she watched her ship disappear in a cascade of silent explosions. The pod's descent through Earth's atmosphere was anything but smooth. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as the heat shield strained against the friction. Zara tried to adjust the trajectory, but the controls were sluggish. The vast expanse of desert below grew larger with frightening speed. Impact came with a violence that sent her world spinning. When the pod finally settled, half buried in sand, Zara found herself suspended upside down, her exoskeleton crackling with damage. Hot air rushed in through tears in the hull, and she could feel her natural moisture barriers already beginning to fail in the desert heat. James Parker was checking his camera gear when he saw the flash in the sky. 20 years as a combat medic had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about that light felt wrong. He watched through his telephoto lens as what looked like debris scattered across the New Mexico desert. "Well, that's different," he muttered, packing up his photography equipment. His old truck kicked up dust as he drove toward the impact site, medical kit ready beside him, a habit he'd never broken since his service days. The debris field told a story unlike anything he'd seen in his 2 decades of military experience. The metal fragments had an almost organic quality, shifting colors in the dying sunlight. Strange symbols decorated the larger pieces, definitely not from any Earth-based aircraft he knew. That's when he noticed the tracks in the sand, not quite human, not quite animal. They led toward a cluster of red rock formations. James grabbed his medical kit and followed, keeping his movements deliberate and quiet. The sun was setting fast, painting the desert in deep purples and reds. He found her huddled in the shadow of a boulder, clearly alien, with violet eyes and crystalline growths that seemed to be part of her body. Some kind of mechanical framework surrounded her, sparking occasionally. She was obviously injured, and even without medical training in xenobiology, James could recognize signs of severe dehydration. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his distance but making his presence known. "I'm James. I'm a medic, a healer. You look like you could use some help." Zara's translator struggled to process the human's words, but his tone carried a gentleness that transcended language. She tried to move, to run, but her damaged exoskeleton and exhausted body betrayed her. The desert heat was overwhelming her system's ability to compensate. "Please," she managed through the translator, her voice coming out with an electronic echo. "Help." James approached slowly, his medical training taking over. "I'm going to check your injuries now, okay? Just stay still." He noticed how her crystalline structures seemed duller where they should have been reflecting the sunset. "You're severely dehydrated. Let's start with that." As he reached for his water supply, James realized his life had just become infinitely more complicated. But looking at the injured alien before him, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Sometimes, he thought, humanity's greatest moments came not from grand gestures, but from simple acts of kindness in the face of the unknown. The first rays of dawn found James Parker's remote cabin transformed into an impromptu alien medical ward. He had managed to transport Zara from the desert using his truck's covered bed, keeping her hidden from the occasional passing vehicle on the desert road. Now she lay on his couch, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the morning light and casting prismatic patterns across the cabin's wooden walls. "Your core temperature is still too high," James said, checking the makeshift cooling system he'd rigged using medical ice packs and a small fan. "But it's better than it was in the desert." He kept his voice calm and professional, though his mind was still processing the reality of treating an alien patient. Zara's translator buzzed to life, working better after James had helped her clean out the sand. "My species evolved on a world with significantly higher humidity and lower temperatures," she explained. "This environment is challenging." She attempted to adjust her position, but her damaged exoskeleton whined in protest. James noticed her discomfort. "That framework you're wearing, it's some kind of medical device, isn't it?" His years of experience with wounded soldiers had taught him to recognize adaptive equipment, even if this version was far more advanced than anything he'd seen. "Yes," Zara replied, her violet eyes studying him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "I was born with a genetic condition that affects my muscle strength and coordination. The exoskeleton compensates, but the crash damaged several key components." She hesitated before adding, "Without it functioning properly, I am vulnerable." The admission clearly cost her something in pride, and James respected that. "Well, I may not understand alien technology, but I've worked with plenty of medical equipment in my time. Maybe I can help figure something out." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "That is, if you're willing to trust me enough to explain how it works." Trust was a complicated matter when you were stranded on an alien world. Zara knew she was violating dozens of first contact protocols just by allowing this human to help her. But as her exoskeleton gave another worrying spark, she realized she had little choice. "The primary power cell was damaged in the crash," she began, pointing to a crystalline node near her shoulder. "It's meant to synchronize with my natural biology, but now it's degrading rapidly." The implications hung heavy in the air. Without a functioning exoskeleton, she would eventually lose all mobility. James leaned closer, examining the intricate device. "The way it interfaces with your crystalline structures, it's almost like a circuit board, but organic." His medical training helped him see the patterns. "These connections here, they're similar to human nerve pathways, aren't they?" Zara's surprise showed in the subtle color shift of her crystals. "Yes, exactly. How did you?" 20 years of patching up soldiers teaches you a thing or two about how bodies work," James replied with a slight smile. "Human, alien, we're all living beings. There's bound to be some common ground." As the morning wore on, they worked together to stabilize her exoskeleton. James contributed his practical medical knowledge while Zara explained the basic principles of her technology. It was slow work, interrupted by periods when she needed to rest, her body still recovering from the crash and desert exposure. During one of these breaks, James brought her a modified electrolyte solution he'd prepared based on what she'd told him about her biology. "Small sips," he instructed. "Your system's still in shock." "Why are you helping me?" Zara asked suddenly. "Your world's authorities would surely be interested in my presence here." James was quiet for a moment, watching the desert through his cabin window. When I was in combat, I treated everyone who needed help, our soldiers, civilians, even enemy combatants. A life is a life. He turned back to her. Besides, I've seen what happens when fear drives first contact. I'd rather start with compassion. The moment was interrupted by a sharp crack from Zara's exoskeleton. Her face contorted in pain as one of the main support structures failed completely. James rushed to her side, helping her stay upright as the device sparked dangerously. The degradation is accelerating, she gasped. Without proper repairs. She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what was at stake. James's mind raced through options. He had some electronics expertise from his military days, and his cabin's workshop was well equipped for his photography work. But this was well beyond anything he'd ever attempted. "Okay," he said finally, "we need help. I know someone, an engineer I served with. She works privately now, keeps to herself. Most importantly, she knows how to keep a secret." He met Zara's gaze. "But bringing anyone else in, that's your choice to make." Zara felt the weight of the decision. Every additional human who knew about her increased the risk of discovery. But as another painful spasm shot through her failing exoskeleton, she realized she was out of options. "Your world has a saying, doesn't it?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the pain. "Between a rock and a hard place?" James nodded, already reaching for his secure satellite phone. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "Together." As he dialed the number, both of them knew they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Help was coming, but so was complication and possibly danger. The morning sun continued to rise over the desert, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, while inside, two beings from different worlds forged an alliance born of necessity and growing trust. Would you like me to continue with Part 3? This section develops the relationship between our characters while introducing new complications with Zara's failing technology, setting up the next phase of the story. The sound of an approaching vehicle sent James into immediate alert mode. He peered through his cabin's window, relaxing slightly when he recognized the battered blue Jeep coming up the dirt road. Dr. Rachel Torres had always preferred vehicles that didn't draw attention, a habit from their shared military days. "She's here," he told Zara, who was propped up in what they'd started calling her maintenance corner, surrounded by tools and makeshift repair attempts. "Dr. Torres is different. She left the military because she couldn't stomach how they were using her innovations. You can trust her." Rachel's first words upon entering the cabin were characteristically direct. "James Parker, when you said you needed engineering help with sensitive medical equipment, this was not what I was expecting." She stood in the doorway, her dark eyes wide but analytical as she studied Zara. "Your heart rate is remarkably steady for someone meeting an alien," Zara observed through her translator. Rachel set down her heavy equipment case. "I've learned that panic rarely improves technical problems." She moved closer, examining the failing exoskeleton with professional interest. "Besides, after what I saw in my military days, an alien with a medical condition feels almost refreshingly straightforward." The next few hours were a blur of technical discussion. Rachel's expertise in advanced prosthetics gave her unique insight into how Zara's exoskeleton interfaced with her crystalline biology. James assisted where he could, but mostly watched in amazement as the two scientists found common ground in their shared love of solving complex problems. "The power cell's degradation is cascading through the entire system," Rachel explained, connecting diagnostic equipment she'd modified on the spot. "But look at these patterns, it's not just mechanical failure. The system is actively trying to adapt to Earth's electromagnetic field." Zara's crystals flickered with excitement. "Of course. The baseline resonance frequency would be calibrated for my homeworld. If we could dash." A distant sound stopped her mid-sentence. James was already moving to the window, his combat instincts razor sharp. "Helicopters," he said grimly. "Military pattern. At least 2, maybe more." Rachel's face went pale. "They must have detected the energy signatures from our diagnostic equipment. I should have been more careful, set up better shielding." "No time for that now," James cut in, already moving with practiced efficiency. "Rachel, pack up anything that can't be explained as normal medical equipment. Zara, we need to move you." "I can barely walk," Zara reminded him, her voice tight with pain and fear. "And my exoskeleton is in pieces." "I came prepared for emergencies," Rachel said, pulling what looked like a modified wheelchair from her Jeep. "It's a prototype I've been working on. The power system should be compatible enough to at least keep your basic mobility functions working." They worked quickly, transferring components from Zara's damaged exoskeleton to Rachel's prototype. The sound of helicopters grew louder. James packed essential supplies, his mind already mapping out escape routes through the desert he knew so well. "There's a network of caves in the red rock formations," he explained as he worked. "Old mining tunnels too. The mineral content interferes with most scanning equipment. Rachel, you need to get out of here separately, maintain deniability." "Like hell," Rachel replied, not looking up from her work. "I've spent too many years watching good science get buried by paranoid bureaucrats. I'm seeing this through." She made a final adjustment to the wheelchair's power system. "Besides, you'll need my expertise to keep this jury-rigged solution working." The first helicopter appeared over the ridge just as they finished loading the essential equipment into James's truck. He'd covered the bed with photography gear, making it look like he was headed out for a desert shoot. Rachel's Jeep was hidden in an old equipment shed, looking like it had been there for years. "Hold tight," James told Zara as they started down a barely visible desert track. "This route's a bit rough, but it'll keep us away from the main roads." Through the truck's rear window, they watched 2 black helicopters circle James's cabin. Zara's crystals dimmed with guilt. "I've brought chaos to your lives," she said softly. Rachel, squeezed into the truck's cab beside them, was checking something on a modified tablet. "Chaos can be clarifying," she said. "Sometimes it shows us what we really stand for." "Besides," James added, expertly guiding the truck through the treacherous terrain, "you're not the first person I've helped disappear into these deserts. During the war, I ran an underground network helping civilians escape conflict zones. Never thought those skills would come in handy for an alien refugee." They drove through the day's worst heat, taking routes only a local would know. James had friends throughout the desert communities, people who owed him favors, who knew how to look the other way. By sunset, they had reached an abandoned research station, its solar panels still functioning enough to power Rachel's equipment. As Rachel worked to stabilize Zara's temporary life support systems, James kept watch from a high window. The helicopters were still searching, but their pattern was becoming more erratic, less focused. "We've bought some time," he said, returning to where Zara rested. "But they won't stop looking. We need a long-term solution." Zara's translator crackled with fatigue. "My people will be searching for me too. The question is, who will find me first?" She looked between her 2 human protectors. "And what happens then?" The desert wind howled outside, carrying dust and secrets across the empty landscape. Inside the old station, 3 unlikely allies faced a future none of them could have imagined days ago. The next moves they made would affect not just their lives, but potentially the relationship between 2 worlds. Rachel's voice broke the heavy silence. "Well, I've always wanted my research to change the world." She managed a wry smile. "Though I admit, I wasn't thinking quite this dramatically." The abandoned research station took on an otherworldly glow as Rachel's equipment interfaced with Zara's technology. They'd been there for 3 days, working around the clock to stabilize her condition while evading detection. James maintained his watch schedule, though the helicopter searches had become less frequent. "I think I've figured it out," Rachel announced, her eyes bright with exhaustion and excitement. "Your exoskeleton's power system, it's not just failing, it's evolving. Adapting to Earth's electromagnetic field like a living thing." Zara moved closer to examine Rachel's readings, the modified wheelchair humming softly. "That shouldn't be possible," she said, but her crystals pulsed with scientific curiosity. "Our technology is advanced, but it's not meant to be adaptive to this degree." "Maybe that's the point," James said from his observation post. "Your people designed your equipment to help you survive on your world. Now it's trying to help you survive on ours." A sudden beeping interrupted their discussion. One of Rachel's monitors was picking up an unusual signal. She rushed to check it, her face growing serious. "It's not military," she said. "The pattern is. Zara, I think your people found you." The alien scientist's crystals flickered with complex emotions. "Let me see," she said, moving to the monitor. Her violet eyes widened. "It's a rescue beacon. They're coming." The news should have been relieving, but tension filled the room. Over the past days, their unlikely alliance had grown into something deeper. They'd shared stories, learned each other's quirks, found common ground in their love of discovery and their desire to help others. "What will happen?" James asked quietly. "When they come?" "Standard protocol is clear," Zara replied, her translator not quite hiding the tremor in her voice. "All evidence of contact must be eliminated. Your memories would be wiped of our encounter." Rachel's hand tightened on her equipment. "And your research?" "Everything we've learned about how your technology can adapt, how it might help people on both our worlds." "Classified. Buried." Zara's crystals dimmed. "My people fear premature contact could be devastating for less developed civilizations." "Less developed?" Rachel's voice had an edge. "We just helped modify alien technology using Earth components. We proved our worlds can work together, learn from each other." James moved from his post to join them. "Maybe that's what they need to understand. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It became a proof of concept for peaceful cooperation." Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying the first hints of a storm. Inside, Zara made a decision that would change multiple worlds. "There's another option," she said slowly. "Instead of erasing this contact, we could make it official. My position as a xenobiologist gives me some diplomatic status. I could request an emergency protocol for peaceful first contact." "Would they listen?" James asked. "They'll have to," Zara replied. "Because I'm not leaving Earth until they do." Her crystals brightened with determination. "My equipment's adaptation to Earth's environment isn't just a malfunction, it's proof that our worlds are compatible. And you too prove that humans are ready for contact, that you can approach the unknown with compassion and intelligence." Rachel was already pulling up data from their work. "We can present them with evidence of successful technological integration. Show them how combining our knowledge led to innovations neither world could achieve alone." "They'll still send people to contain this," Zara warned. "And your military won't stop looking either. We're choosing a difficult path." James checked his satellite phone. "I still have contacts who believe in doing what's right over what's ordered. People who can help us make our case to both sides." He looked at the two women who had become so important to him. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The rescue beacon's signal grew stronger. Soon, they would have to make their stand. But as they prepared for whatever came next, they knew they were part of something historic, not just a rescue, but perhaps the beginning of a new chapter in the story of both their worlds. Thunder rolled across the desert as the storm approached. In the old research station, three beings from two worlds prepared to challenge the protocols and prejudices that kept their civilizations apart. Their choice might cost them everything, but it also held the promise of changing everything. The desert storm raged outside the research station as two sleek ships descended through the darkness. Their landing lights cut through the rain, illuminating the small group waiting to meet them. James stood protectively near Zara's modified wheelchair, while Rachel kept her hand close to the data tablet containing their research. The first ship bore the insignia of Zara's scientific institute. The second, to their surprise, carried United Nations markings. James's old contacts had come through, reaching people who understood the importance of handling first contact diplomatically. "Remember," Zara said softly as the ship's hatches opened, "whatever happens, we've already proved something important. Two worlds can meet in friendship, not fear." From the first ship emerged three figures similar to Zara, their crystalline structures glowing with authority. The lead alien introduced himself as Director Nixus of the Interstellar Contact Prevention Bureau. His disapproval radiated in waves of purple light through his crystals. The UN ship discharged a small delegation led by Ambassador Helen Wu, her calm demeanor masking the historic magnitude of the moment. James recognized one of his old commanding officers, General Martinez, among the group. "Researcher Venn," Director Nixus began, his translator carrying tones of stern disappointment, "you have violated our most sacred protocols regarding primitive world contact." "With respect, Director," Zara responded, her voice steady, "I suggest you review our findings before making judgments about primitive worlds." She nodded to Rachel, who stepped forward with their data. "What you see as a violation," Rachel explained, highlighting holographic displays of their combined research, "we see as proof that our civilizations can enrich each other." Zara's exoskeleton didn't just adapt to Earth's environment, it evolved. And with our help, it became something new, something better. Ambassador Wu studied the technical displays with keen interest. "Your technology merged with ours successfully?" "More than successfully," Zara replied. "The integration suggests possibilities neither of our worlds imagined. Medical breakthroughs, environmental adaptations, new forms of clean energy. And more importantly," James added, meeting General Martinez's gaze, "it shows we can face the unknown with compassion instead of fear. That when our worlds meet, it doesn't have to be in crisis or conflict." Director Nixus's crystals flickered with uncertainty. "The protocols exist for a reason. History shows that premature contact between civilizations often leads to disaster. History also shows that isolation leads to stagnation," Ambassador Wu countered. "Perhaps it's time for both our peoples to write a new chapter." The storm outside began to ease, as if nature itself was listening to the debate that would shape the future of two worlds. Director Nixus consulted with his colleagues, their crystals pulsing in silent communication. Finally, he turned back to the group. "Your actions were unauthorized," he said to Zara, "but your results are compelling. Perhaps there is room for a controlled experiment in cultural exchange." "A pilot program," Ambassador Wu suggested, "starting with scientific and medical cooperation. Small steps, carefully monitored." As the officials began discussing details, James moved closer to Zara. "Looks like you'll be staying on Earth a while longer," he said softly. "Someone will need to oversee this exchange program." Zara's crystals brightened. "I'll need local guides who understand both the scientific and human elements." She looked between James and Rachel. "Partners I can trust." Rachel was already scanning the preliminary agreement on her tablet. "They're establishing a joint research facility. Clean slate, new protocols, focused on beneficial technologies for both worlds." Her eyes sparkled with possibilities. "Think of what we could accomplish together." As dawn broke over the desert, the storm clouds parted to reveal a sky filled with promise. The official delegations prepared to depart, leaving behind the framework for humanity's first steps into a larger universe. James watched the ships take off, standing between the two women who had helped him change history. "You know," he said with a slight smile, when I headed out to take sunset photos that day, I didn't expect to end up helping establish interplanetary relations. Life's funny that way, Rachel replied, already making notes about lab requirements. Sometimes the best discoveries happen when you're looking for something else entirely. Zara's crystals shimmered with contentment as she watched the sunrise paint the desert in gold. On my world, we have a saying, the greatest journeys begin with a single act of kindness. She looked at her friends. I think we've proved that's true across all worlds. The three of them stood together, watching the new day dawn on a changed Earth. They had begun as strangers from different worlds, thrown together by chance and crisis. They emerged as pioneers, bridge builders between civilizations, proof that the best of each world could bring out the best in the other. In the distance, the desert stretched endlessly under the morning sun, no longer a place of isolation and secrets, but a birthplace of new possibilities. The story of humanity's first steps into a larger community had begun, written not in fear and suspicion, but in trust, compassion, and hope.